Hi, you're watching TechCrunch TV. My name's Colleen Taylor. Here with me in the studio, I'm very pleased to have, all the way from Los Angeles, Mr. Mark Suster from GRP Partners.
That's the one.
That's the one. Thank you for coming by. It's good to have you in town.
Well, you say all the way from LA. It's an hour flight,
It's
you know,
not so
so
bad.
I tend to make it to San Francisco at least once a month, sometimes twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a big week, I think, for everybody in tech here in San Francisco.
Seems to be. A lot of events, a lot of parties, a lot of news, Google I/O.
Right, good stuff. And you personally have a lot of news, and so that's part of why we invited you to come by, because you have so many things. You've kind of been around, bubbling in the news for the past week, especially. With
Usually getting myself in trouble for saying something I shouldn't say.
No, you said some very interesting things about
Yeah.
acqui-hires, and I
Yeah.
want to get to that in a minute,
Okay.
which is kind of a contrarian thing. And then also a contrarian thing, some news today. Awesome getting a new CEO, the founder stepping down as CEO and
Yeah.
hiring someone from the outside. And I kind of wanted to ask you about that, because that's another sort of contrarian thing. Here, nowadays, we're hearing a lot about people saying that founder is the person who should be the CEO. You know, people tried to encourage Mark Zuckerberg to step aside earlier, you know, in Facebook's lifetime, but he didn't, and people are happy with that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of get your opinion. Like, when does it make sense for a founder to step aside as CEO?
Well, I think there's different models for success. I mean, you can look at LinkedIn, and Reid Hoffman wrote a great piece on, you know, why he thought he needed to bring in a new CEO, and I think Jeff has defied everybody's expectations and done phenomenally well there. So I think that's a case where it's gone really well. I think a case where a founder wasn't a great CEO was Yahoo. You know, when Jerry Yang came back, I mean, those weren't exactly great days. Not that other people have necessarily done better with Yahoo. Look, my starting point is I like to back founders, and I like those founders to stay as long as in the role as long as they can and should. And that's certainly my preference, because in general I believe missionaries do better than mercenaries. And there are the rare individuals who like to step into companies and they absorb it and they take it on and it becomes their personality. But I think it's much better with missionaries. But I'll just say one thing. I would encourage every viewer to go to Jonathan Strauss's blog. If you type Jonathan Strauss blog, I can't remember if it's jonathanstrauss.com or not, but type that into Google and search it. And he wrote about his decision to step down and why he decided. It was perhaps the most honest blog post I've ever seen on the topic.
Yeah, and he, of course, is the founder of Awesome.
Yes, I should have said that.
No,
Yeah.
it's great. And he said something in that blog post as well at the end, that he said, Mark Suster told me that the coming year is going to be like the best year of my life.
Yeah.
You know, stepping aside. What did you mean by
And
that?
I believe it, and I saw he and his girlfriend last night, and I pulled her aside and I said, this is going to be the best year in Jonathan's life. Listen, I backed Jonathan, I don't know, 3.5 years ago or something like that. He had exactly one employee, himself. And he's such a smart guy. He has such great vision for the industry. He really had a strong sense of where social analytics were going. He knew what the problems were. I mean, the biggest problem is that we went through an era in social media of vanity. All people cared about was likes or followers, and those are proximate outputs. What we really care about is conversion. We care about the bottom end of the funnel. So, you know, it's one thing if I have 10,000 people visit my blog and none of them come back, that's not useful. If 10,000 people come and 1,000 of them sign up for my news list, that's a good outcome for me. If I was selling product, you know, maybe buying product. And he recognized that early on, and he recognized that you needed to track analytics on a more granular level. Fast forward though, he, at a certain phase in a company, you have to evolve more from being a product visionary to wanting to live outside with your customer base. And it's very difficult to do that. It involves a lot of travel, a lot of client contact, a lot of compromises and give and take on what requirements you'll meet and won't meet. And, you know, he wasn't doing it. He wasn't stepping into that role, and I think he acknowledged that.
Okay. Makes sense. And so it seems like if you can make that transition and you want to, then you should stick around as CEO. But if not, it's time to be honest with yourself.
I think there is a critical fit. So for Jonathan, that was his issue. That isn't most people's issue. And I still, first of all, he's staying. So to the reason that I said it's going to be the best year of his life, I don't think people really appreciate how stressful it is to be a CEO. it's like when you read TechCrunch, you mostly read the glamour side of it.
Right.
I couldn't sleep. When I was CEO, I couldn't sleep. I put on weight. I, traveled too much. It was really destructive. And I actually wrote, the first blog post I ever wrote for TechCrunch was exactly this. So if you search on the yo-yo life of a tech entrepreneur, which was my TechCrunch article that I first wrote, I talked about it. And most CEOs that resonates with, because he stressed that he hires employees, but will he meet payroll in 6 months? And having to think about, why haven't I hit my revenue targets? And, how do I handle payroll and communicating with investors and finding new investors? And all these things are stresses. I remember thinking to myself, I had an employee who came to me and he said, I'm thinking about buying a house. Do you think it's a good idea? What I wanted to say is, F no, we got 3 months cash in the bank. Are you kidding me? But you can't do that. And so you just have to have a blind belief in yourself that defies all logic that you're just going to find a way to make it all work, but you internalize all that stress. And now that we have Fred on board, and Fred is fantastic. We've been working with him for a while. He's the new CEO, Fred McIntyre. We've been working with him for a while. He's taken a huge passionate interest in what we do. He came from a digital media background, and he had, at CBS and AOL, had been involved in a lot of metrics and measurements, so he immediately understood it. And I think he can take that stress off of Jonathan. So the reason I think it's going to be such a great year is imagine you getting to do what you love to do. He loves product. And I know that he wants to do more, like product, biz dev, strategy, all this stuff. But he loves product. And with Fred now being able to deal with consulting engagements and hiring staff and financing and all that stuff, it'll free Jonathan up to be an artist.
Cool. And I want to talk about acqui-hires as well.
Yes.
He wrote a pretty line in the sand blog post about this trend of all these acqui-hires. It was now a week ago, on Thursday of last week, we saw a bunch of acqui-hires done all in the same day. But you're saying that these are bad. This is a bad trend that is surfacing again.
Let me say this. It's not, there's no universal truth, right? So every time I write, then the controversy starts and people can't do nuance in blogs, really, apparently. Do I think that I tell a young entrepreneur, or any entrepreneur really, if you haven't raised venture capital and you're building a company and someone offers to buy you, let's make up a number and let's call it 8 million. And let's say that you own half your company. I usually look them in the eyeballs and I say, look, have you made money before? And usually the answer is no. And I said, would this make a meaningful difference in your life? And usually the answer is yes. And I would say to them, listen, if you believe this is your best idea ever, and you really passionately believe you're onto something huge, then you should stick it out. And you should, as you grow, find other ways to monetize, whether it's paying yourself more, bonuses, selling some of your stock in a secondary market. But if you're not absolutely driven for this to be your life's work, then taking $4 million off the table, putting aside your kid's college education. I know you probably don't have kids yet, but like just knowing that you've got your kid's college education one day set aside, buying your house, owning something or having savings, or doing your next company without having to raise money from other people. Whatever you decide to do, it can change your life. So I always tell entrepreneurs, I think it's a great outcome for you if you can get it. What I was commenting on was the strategy of acquirers constantly buying companies as a way to innovate and the sort of war for talent. And I actually saw it on TechCrunch first where, I think it was Buy or Die was the title of the article. And I just think that's such BS, buy or die. Yahoo's racing around making a bunch of acquisitions. They're going to every mobile startup that hasn't raised money, and they're saying, why don't you just, come work at Yahoo? And what I was saying was, I don't think that strategy is sustainable for Yahoo. I like Yahoo. I'm rooting for them to be successful. So writing something like that, I'm sure, rankled some people there, but I just don't believe in that strategy of we have to acqui-hire and compete with Google and try to buy all these companies.
Right.
And what I was pointing out also was the downside to that is all the employees who are inside of Yahoo, your absolute best employees should be saying to themselves, well, they clearly value people who do startups more than they value me. I'm going to go do a startup.
Right. So it's bad for morale.
I think so.
Inside the company.
I think so.
Do you think that there are more companies that are being built sort of with just the idea that they're going to be an acqui-hire target?
Yes. I think there is a class, a generation of people who view the business of creating Quickflips as what they aspire to do. No one would say it's so crass, but I really believe it. And that's okay too, if that's what you want to do. What I believe is, I mean, I've been through a few tech cycles, and I remember there was a tech cycle where everyone who was a consultant or a banker suddenly wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so you had so many more entrepreneurs. And when things got tough, all those people, you know, we used to say B2B e-commerce and B2C e-commerce, which was business to consumer and business to business. But then the code word became back to consulting and back to banking. And what I feel like is that generation of people who are not driven by the long-term outcome of the product they're creating, but are driven by an acquisition event, don't produce great entrepreneurs.
Okay. And let's talk one last question here. You know, you're from Los Angeles, you live there. Want to talk about what the scene's like. I think we at TechCrunch are heading down to Los Angeles here pretty soon. What's really hot there right now? What should we absolutely check out? What are you most excited about?
Well, let me start by saying I think LA is probably the fastest growing tech community in America. There's just so much exciting stuff going on. People, I think, more hear about it, like all the now accelerators we have in town. I founded one a few years ago called Launchpad LA, run by Sam Teller. But there's Mucker Labs, that's a great accelerator, Amplify LA. You have Start Engine, you have, gosh, I'm going to forget one, Science.
Science, of course.
So all of these are creating a lot more visibility for LA, and they're also creating a lot more early stage startups. But you have to realize about LA, we invented most of the monetization of the internet. And I like to say necessity is the mother of all invention. When you are in Silicon Valley, you can dream and build big boxes and routers and switches and browsers, and you know all that stuff comes from Silicon Valley. The first thought in Silicon Valley is not how do I create a new way of charging somebody for something. So Google, the most profitable company perhaps in history, the most successful company perhaps in history, their business model of sponsored search, where you see on the right-hand side of the screen, it's called SEM, Search Engine Marketing, was created by Bill Gross in LA. Out of Idea Lab, he created a company called Overture, sold it for $1.6 billion, and then won a patent lawsuit with Google, who paid, Yahoo bought it, paid $500 million more, so it's $2.1 billion in total proceeds, and GRP backed Overture, so we feel proud of that. And Google won, so like whenever I tell that story, like the hairs on the back of necks of Google people go up and say, well, who's winning now? Yes, they won, absolutely. That's not my point. Google's a great company. But the idea of how to monetize came from LA. The second example I would give you is called semantic analysis. So you read a page and you understand the context of the page, and then you serve up a Google ad on the right-hand side of that. Came from LA. The company was called Applied Semantics. It was Gil Elbaz founded it and sold it to Google for $106 million pre-IPO. And both of those guys have something in common. They both graduated from Caltech. Caltech, one of the top science institutions in the country, is in LA. I like to remind people, USC, UCLA, Cal Poly Pomona, we graduate more engineers in the LA community than anywhere else in the country. The problem historically is they didn't want to stay. And that's changing. And that's changing for a couple reasons. One is the layer that I talked about before, like routers, hardwares, databases, caching, software, all that stuff, is largely built, and it'll continue to be built. But what we're seeing now is the 3 C's above it. We're seeing content, communication, and commerce, the 3 C's. And when you think about the internet, pretty much those are the only 3 things you do. So the stuff that you do is being driven increasingly outside of Silicon Valley, a lot in New York, a lot in LA. And I'm not saying Silicon Valley won't continue to be the hub of innovation and technology. It will be. What I'm saying is that places like LA, places like New York are growing faster. So one area I want to talk about is video. People watch 5.3 hours of television a day. Obviously something near and dear to you because you do this show. This is the future. Like TechCrunch is going to be a video company if it exists in 10 years from now, which hopefully it will, because that's how people want to consume information. They read less than half hour a day, and I know when I say this in front of smart people, they don't want to hear it because we don't watch 5.3 hours of TV a day, but that's how people choose to be entertained. So some stats for you. Of the top 10 YouTube networks that were created, 9 of them are in LA. Of the top 5, 3.5 years ago, none of those 5 existed. Today they employ more than 1,000 people. I know that's small, but it's growing very fast. In aggregate, I think they're doing collectively about $250 million in revenue. They're building real companies. there's a lot of innovation happening, and it's really the crossroad. What Silicon Valley doesn't understand is they don't understand costume design and set design and staging and post-production, and they don't understand writing for shows and being showrunners and how to do brand integration. What Hollywood doesn't understand is how important technology is to distribute your video products, how to grow an audience, how to do analytics, how to get A/B testing on, snapshots of photos or on links to figure out what's going to drive clicks. And the merger between those tech skills and video skills is really driving the growth. So I backed one company in the space. It's called Maker Studios. We're the largest network. We did 3 billion video views last month, so it's a real business. And the CTO of that company was my co-founder when I created a software company. We sold to Salesforce.com. He stayed for 5 years. He ran engineering for content management and for mobile. He ran all their initiatives. And he moved down to LA to take on this challenge. And I think a lot of people are considering that.
Video, exciting stuff.
Yes.
Maybe we'll meet in the middle somewhere between Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
LA,
Bakersfield maybe.
I was thinking more like, Santa Barbara.
There you go.
But that'd be nicer. But anyway, Mark Suster, such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Come by and keep us posted.
Appreciate it.